Start an important game. The team already on the pitch. TV is not yet complete.
Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome back to those of you who were with us this morning, including people online. It's my pleasure to welcome you for this afternoon session of presentation of team projects. We have the pleasure to welcome for this team project representatives from the International Esports Federation who are online with us, Mr. Boban Totovsky and Mrs. Emily Cho. Welcome to both of you. We have in the room this afternoon our members of the jury, Professor Daniel Oyon, who's in charge of governance, finance and accounting, Professor Bjorn Walliser, in charge of marketing, Professor Giovanni Battista Derci, who's in charge of sustainability, Mr. Dr. Vincent Gremaud, who is online with us again this afternoon, and Dr. Claude Stricker, our executive director. With no further ado, I now pass on and give the floor to our four members of the group who has worked on this mandate for their final report.
Thank you, Cedric. Good afternoon, everyone present in this room, and good morning, good afternoon, good evening to everyone watching us online. We would like to welcome our client, IeSF, represented by Mr. Boban Totovsky, Ms. Emily Cho, Nalain, thank you so much for all your help. And let's get into it. So, my name is Shubham Ruhela, and I'm here with my teammates Jisoo Kim, Kevin Fulgham, and Francesco Sabatini. And we are here to present the findings of our report, which analyzed the economic impact of the World Esports Championship on host cities. So, who here in this room has played an esport before? Just a quick show of hands. So it's mostly the young ones, and Professor Walliser, very interesting. But that makes my job slightly easier. So esports can be defined as competitive gaming. It takes multiple forms. It can be an individual event. It can be a team event. It can go from different genres, such as strategy games like Dota 2 or League of Legends. You can look at first-person shooter games like PUBG or Call of Duty. You can even look at virtual sports, such as FIFA and F1, which we are all very familiar with. Now, the esports industry has only gained relevance in the last decade or 15 years, more or less, and it has grown rapidly in this time period. To just understand how rapidly it's grown, let's do a quick Q&A. Who can tell me how much money did Real Madrid win by winning the Champions League final this year?
22 million?
That is correct. 22.69 million was taken home by Real Madrid by winning just the final. Now, can someone tell me how much the winners of Dota 2's The International took home by winning the final last year?
26 million.
Close, but that's a little bit too much. It's 18.2 million USD. Still good, comparing the Dota 2's International started in 2011 and the UEFA Champions League has been in place since 1955. Makes you think, right? So, our client is the International Esports Federation. They have been in operation since 2008. Based in South Korea, they have 127 member federations and 4 continental federations at this point in time. They started the IeSF World Esports Championship in 2011. And it has grown steadily from 9 competing member nations to more than 15 member nations competing last year. And is expected to grow to 100 competing nations this year in Bali, Indonesia. Now, something to note about what a period of growth IeSF is going through. Just last year, the World Esports Championship that happened in Eilat in Israel, the prize pool was 50,000 USD. And this year in Bali, Indonesia, the prize pool is 500,000 USD. That represents a 10x growth, and I'm pretty sure you guys can make of it what you have to. Now, going into the scope of our project, as I mentioned, the economic impact was a key part of our project. However, there were 3 supplementary parts which were also essential in order for us to complete the economic impact analysis. The first was to map the stakeholder ecosystem globally, all esports, all different kinds of players, what they're doing, what kind of moves they're making. Second, basis this stakeholder analysis, we suggested a few host cities for the future, for hosting the Esports World Championship in the future. And last, we reviewed the growth strategies of IeSF currently, and basis the current market trends, we suggested a few of our own. Right. Getting into the stakeholder mapping. there are already a large number of esports ecosystem stakeholder mappings out there. And we decided not to start from scratch, and we base our stakeholder analysis on pre-existing mappings. However, we quickly realized that there was something lacking in these mappings. All of these mappings tended to focus on the main players and how they're influencing the markets. So you can think of game publishers, you can think of teams, you can think of sponsors and advertisers. However, there are a lot of other players who are working in the background whose news doesn't make it to mainstream media, who are also influencing this ecosystem. Take the example of Schalke 04. It's a football club in the top tier of the German league. Last year, they were doing really badly in the competition. And around Feb, they realized they might not stay in the top tier. So they decided to sell their esports team, which had a spot in the League of Legends European Championships, to someone else. And they generated 31.04 million USD out of that sale. Now, this sale is not that big in terms of money, but it's very significant in terms of what it does to Schalke 04. They were able to immediately use this money. After they got relegated, they moved in the second year. They used this money to buy a set of new players. And this year, they're back up into the top tier, the German Bundesliga. And where did they get this money from? They didn't just have 31 million USD lying around. I mean, who does? And so they got potential investors to come in and put in this money. And these investors were undisclosed. So the so-called unnamed players in the background. And this just goes on to show that there's a lot of different things going on in this new esports ecosystem that will go on to change a lot of things. And now I'll hand on to Jisoo, who will take us through the selection of host cities.
Thank you, Shiv. So now we are moving on to the methodology of the city selection, how we select this city. We're using the 6 criteria. The first is that we're checking out in the city there is exist of the game publisher is in there. And second is a relation between the government, the federation. And third is we are checking about the government awareness and support. And fourth is the past event. Because of the characteristic of the esports, we have to find out the venue or infrastructure they can give you. And then 5 is a potential sponsor in the area. And lastly, for the future sustainability, we're looking for the education system exists in the city. So now we're moving on here, the pre-selected city. During our presentation start, our report start from the November 2021. So 2021 November, the IeSF held the championship at the Elliott. So we include the Elliott as in our economic impact calculation. And second city is the Stockholm. Stockholm is as known as a blooming up and the hot city for the esports ecosystem. Because of this region and the external consultant recommend the city to the doing of the economic impact. And then also the IeSF approved to do it. So let's move on to the third city here, Raleigh in North Carolina. So in North Carolina, there is one big game publisher, Epic, is in there. And in North Carolina, Cary is the headquarters of the Epic. And then United States Esports Federation has a good relationship between the North Carolina. Also, they are partnership with the AAU, the Amateur Athletic Union, which means very good. And then the third is the grant fund is very, very interesting. Because of grant fund, when we are launching our event in the North Carolina, over the 5 million, we get the 25% of tax refund. We include this fact in our equation. Also, they had in 2019, the Rainbow Six Siege, which of the game name, they held the championship in the North Carolina. And Lloyd Hardware and Bank of America will be the future sponsor in North Carolina. Lastly, University of North Carolina, Wilmington, they has a degree program for the esports. So because of this region, we choose the Nelly as one of the candidates as the host esports championship. The last city we're moving on is Thailand, Bangkok. In Bangkok, there is a law of a game publisher now. But in Bangkok, the Thailand Esports Federation headquarters is in there. The national team of Thailand is very shown their remarkable growth in the Asian esports ecosystem. So, and then for the government awareness and funding, the funding and support from the sports ability. Actually, the Thailand are waiting for the sport or esports the game. And then 2018, the Toyota Counter-Strike was held in the Thailand. So they has a very good infrastructure in the Thailand. And the last, the Bangchak Cooperation. Bangchak Cooperation is one of the high-rank cooperation in Thailand, and then they are now partnership with the PSG Netherlands team. So the Bangchak Cooperation can be the future sponsor for the Bangkok. And lastly, the Bangkok University has a standard curriculum for the education. So in this regarding point, we are choose the Bangkok as our candidate. Now I'm passing floor to the Kevin.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jisoo. So let's get into the heart of the presentation, right? The reason it's called the economic impact of Esports World Championships on host cities, core part. So we mapped out the stakeholders, we chose the cities. Now we can get to the methodology. One of the unique things we did for this project is we built an economic impact calculator that allow all potential host cities to calculate their own economic impact for their own cities. So they can tailor it to the number of spectators, the budget, their funding levels of government funding. We think this is going to provide a lot of value for IeSF and any future cities going forward. Why is this really important? Data transparency means that spending in government funding is more critical than ever. Taxpayers want to know where their money's really going, and at the same time, rights holders want to know that they're going to cities that fit their brands. And we believe that this calculator can bring all these together, make it a little bit easier to broker these deals together. So now let's get into the methodology. The methodology was recommended to us by ISDS and also used in the 2017 World University Games in Taipei. It consists of two major factors: net injection, which includes any money coming from outside the host city, inside the host city, specifically for the event, and a multiplier, which measures the amount of propensity to consume and import based on the local economy as well as the host city. So we got that. Now let's walk through the next 6 steps. On the first slide, we can see the first 3 steps, which really measures the amount of money coming into the city. First, let's look at injection. Injection refers to any money coming into the city focusing on the eSport event. Let's say that IeSF wants to hire a graphic designer to work on the ELOT World Championship, but the graphic designer is in Canada. That money wouldn't be included in our injection because that money is located outside of ELOT. For external revenue refers to spectators. The number of spectators, how much they spend, over how many days, bringing money from outside the city to inside the city. Lastly, we're going to look at calculating the net injection. There's multiple different ways you can bring money into this event, and you can see from the graph below that we have 3 major areas. We have a budget, which is comprised of public and private funding, as well as the external revenue, which we calculated in step number 2. However, we have to remove government funding at this step because we assume that the government, who would be a significant contributor to this event, would have already spent the money it's going to spend for this IeSF event in its city previously. So we have to remove that because that's not any kind of new money coming into the local ecosystem. All right, let's take a breather and let's get to the next part. Next part and the next 3 steps are about calculating the economic impact of that money. Step number 4 is primary income. It can actually be divided into 2 more steps, 4.1 and 4.2, which you can find in your appendixes. Primary income is really about the amount of money the local organizing community has control over. In 4.1, direct income, that's how the local organizing committee spends its budget, its salaries, its overhead costs and whatnot. In 4.2, that's the indirect income. That's about how the local organizing committee partners with local vendors in the host city. Let's say ELOT needs security, they need accommodations, they need food and beverage, and that's that aspect. Step number 5 is about induced impact. Induced impact, we mean, is money coming from outside the city to inside the city is going to have a multiplying effect where the people inside the city will have more money to spend. That more money will eventually come back to the local government in the form of increased taxes. Calculating up, we can aggregate 4, so that's 4.1, 4.2, as well as 5, and we can put it all together to get step number 6, calculating the overall economic impact. So, we went a little bit fast, we went through the methodology, and now we're going to apply it to our 4 select cities. First one is ELOT. So, as we mentioned before, ELOT is an exception case. It's supposed to be held pushed to 2021 because of COVID. And because of COVID and its once-in-a-generational impacts, it's had a profound impact on, you can see the number of visitors, 1,000, the budget, 2.5 million. And that has a dramatic impact on ELOT because ELOT is already a very tourist-dependent economy in Israel that has a lot of import-export. Despite all these kind of challenges and concerns, we can still see the economic impact is about 4.8 million, or roughly about double the size of the budget. Next, we can look at our 3 selected cities. So the 3 select cities we have are all at various stages in the esports ecosystem development. We chose them to have diversity, to give potential hosts an understanding of what cities could do across the world, not to give them a single example. So actually, Bangkok and Stockholm have relatively same propensity to import and export from the city and the country level, but the differences in the economic impact between the 2 cities can be explained that spectators who visit Stockholm will spend roughly twice as much to get the same kind of value as Bangkok. Now we can see about the dramatic 13.15 million to 21 million and 17 million to 29 million. Raleigh is an exceptional case. The US economy is very strong. We have a large ability to import and export, and we also have a high cost of living. And that kind of really explains a lot more in the high numbers you see for Raleigh for the 8 days and the 12 days. Looking at the graph, you can see that we have 2 different packages. Package number A on the left is for 8 days. That's a $15 million budget and 3,500 spectators. And package number B is 12 days, a $20 million budget, over 3,500 spectators. As I mentioned before, we built an economic calculator, and these numbers are only supposed to give you a reflection of what can happen. We believe that tailoring the response will be really impactful for every city going forward. So now I'm going to turn it over to Fran, who's going to talk a lot about how to grow IeSF, the organization, and grow the Esports World Championships.
So now we are moving to the last part of our project scope with growth strategies. As mentioned before by my colleague Shubham, IeSF in the last year incremented the prize pool about 1,000% in the World Championship, and this is already a great sign of the effort that they are putting around growth. But let's see how our first approach. And so, of course, we have a multiple conversation with the IeSF member to understand better where are they standing around all the areas that they are tackling for growth strategies. Then we have the chance to introduce industry experts like Populous and Logitech to understand where is going the market. Then we use our stakeholder mapping to understand better where is their interest, the desire, and the shift of the ecosystem is going. And this is how we are going to what we are going to propose to IeSF. First of all, it's important to develop a centralized platform to develop to collect data in order to keep track of all the KPIs, to understand strategies and evaluate better after and propose systematically changes in the future for the future event. Then eSport acceptance, that is strongly related to educational program. Educational programs start from the better understanding of eSport and gaming worldwide, but then even, for example, referees program, after career program for the athlete, and moreover. Last but not least, growing the event, increasing the prize money. As already mentioned, IeSF had the power to increase the prize pool to 50,000 to 500,000. That is already a great effort. But have in mind that the highest prize pool for an international event based on 1 day is 45 million. So the pathway is still very long, but all the bases are in place, and increasing the prize pool, you are able to bring to the event higher, stronger player. Stronger player means more participants, more attendance. More attendance will be more views, that brings in more stakeholder and more sponsor, and this means more money. And now I leave the floor to Shubham.
Thank you, Fran. Now we've covered all of these different aspects of our research, but how can IeSF best utilize all of this moving forward? So the first thing that we recommend to them is that they move forward with a continuous stakeholder analysis. This industry is still quite young and developing really rapidly. As I mentioned earlier in the beginning, about 15 minutes ago, that there are all these different players coming in. So IeSF needs to dedicate more time and resources to be able to map these stakeholders appropriately and be ready for when they make all kinds of moves. The second is when we conducted the economic impact analysis, we had data for 4 IeSF World Esports Championships to start with. We, however, then referenced it with the real-world sports events of similar sizes, and we drew inspiration from those to carry. Now, moving forward, we expect IeSF to conduct a better data collection overall so that we can have more faith in our projections moving forward. Now, this can be representative in the form of higher p-values for the regressions that we ran in calculating the marginal propensity to consume, or however that case might be. Lastly, IeSF has entered a rapid stage of growth. What this means is that they have to start behaving like a startup. They have to experiment. They have to learn from these experiments really rapidly. They have to redeploy new plans, and then they have to learn again. And this process has to be ongoing for the coming years for IeSF. Now, in summation, IeSF is providing a lot of valuable support to the esports industry in order to stabilize it and professionalize it as we move forward. This is already evident from the prize money that has been mentioned by Francesco, but they're also working on educational programs which are necessary for this industry in order for it to mature. And we think that IeSF is in a great position to be able to do that going forward. We would like to thank Mr. Boban Tatovsky and Ms. Emily Cho for all of their support throughout these last 8 months. We would also like to thank Ms. Nalin Naidu for all of her support, and Ms. Christy Dukehart for all of their support. Thank you.
We'll open this Q&A discussion. I propose we turn towards the client, Mr. Tatovsky or Mrs. Cho, if you have any questions to the group before we open, and then turn to the jury members.
I would just like to ask how challenging and different was this research from everything you do in your path comes here to be so relevant in your education path.
Sorry, Boban, can you repeat that question? The volume was a little low. Sorry.
Okay, can you hear me now?
Yeah, yes.
Okay, I wanted to ask how challenging and how different was this research compared to everything you learned in your education path so far?
Well, to answer that question, only one of us had ever conducted an economic impact analysis before, Jisoo. The rest of it was just basically kind of thrown to the deep end, which provides a very steep learning curve. So I think it was overall a very, not to all points, but in the end, reflecting back, it was very satisfying, I would say.
Okay.
Turning then to members of the jury. Any questions for
The expert.
I may start. It can be pretty long. Thank you very much for the presentation and the work done. I know the complexity associated with producing such economic impact studies. The major point is for sure in your case is to establish the right assumptions. Here we're talking about using, let me say, assumption to replace actual data, because of course, in the case of an ex post case, ex post analysis, since, let me say, there was no work done before in order to anticipate this project, there were some data, let me say, missing that should have been used in order to get to ensure accuracy of the study. So you had to work. On the other side, of course, if you also have to make projection, anyway, this by construction, you have to make assumption, right? So I think that the major point that I wanted to raise here is how much, and let me say, like now I turn into a question to see also how you react to this, how much you thought to be prudent, to use a prudential approach into producing your estimates.
Okay, so So there were we had, I think, four major assumptions that we had to decide upon, which we didn't have enough data for. For instance, one of them was regarding government funding, right? That one was easy to solve because IeSF, when they approached host cities, they approached the local government with the proposal of covering 50% of the budget, 50% of the cost. So that one was easy to figure out. Next, we had to assume salaries which are going into the direct impact of employees there, people use for PR, all those things. That we referenced through the 4 years of data that IeSF provided us, which was always 6%, like close between 5 to 7% of their budget across the 4 years. So we assumed 6% for that. Next, we had to figure out overheads, taxes, and that again was it was a mix of assumptions and mix of real-world data. Real-world data because we knew the cities that we're looking at, so we could reference some of the events that have already happened and the kind of taxes that are applicable. So that plus the profits are speculative. So we weren't very expansive, so to say, in assuming that the event would be turning a profit. So this assumption came out to be about I think between 10 and 11, or either of the two percentages of the total budget that we've taken out as overhead costs. We have no more assumptions, right? Sorry. Yeah, there we go. Yes. So these are all the major assumptions. So as you can see, the government support has even for sports event, physical sports event, is highly varied. There's no way to benchmark this, and I think Kevin had multiple calls in you and Claude regarding this. That it varied from 20% of the government supporting 20% to the government supporting 80%. So we just went with 50%, which is what IeSF does, and the rest, I guess, I explained. And the number of external visitors that we assumed was basis the growth that IeSF is seeing. Because if I remember correctly, in 2019, the number of visitors that IeSF World Championship got was around 700 or 800, and now in ILAD last year it was 1,000, and now with the increased prize money, we expect this number to go up to about 2,500 easily, because the prize money has gone up 10x. It's attracting better players. It's going to be attracting more audiences. So and then we just sort of, since we're doing future cities, so we added an extra 1,000. To the number of visitors.
So if you need to give an answer, how much prudential you were? So basically, let me say, these estimates are underestimated or are overestimated?
It's just the right amount of estimation.
Right.
With the current data that we had, I don't think we have been overestimating anything. We have based all of these assumptions it started from fact. It has definitely gone to fiction at some level, at some point. But that point where it turns to fiction is very close to the final point. It doesn't start with fiction, if that helps you.
And how can we say that actually you are not underestimated? Can you use some references in order to some benchmarks? Have you thought to use some benchmark in order to say, okay, let's in some way benchmark this ratio that we get here with, let me say, not 22 million, but anyway, this 22 million should be probably compared against the initial injection in order to know, the initial injection, I have an additional added value on the territory of, 20%, 30%, 200%. That's what actually kind of seems you are reaching here in some cases.
I mean, in terms of prudence and benchmarking, it seems that a lot of sports organizations are particularly sensitive about their data and releasing into the data. And then we're also mindful that IeSF is a unique organization based on unique aspects of esports. Right? There's not a lot of organizations that focus around on bringing national teams together and have to deal with the aspect of flying a lot of national teams together for these events as well. Going back to your question about prudence, if we're overestimating or underestimating, I would say that we're actually a little bit underestimating for prudence sake, because these organizations can grow very quickly, and we're very mindful that the calculator is supposed to show a option that is believable, but also conservative as an aspect. The salaries can be a lot harder, the profit margins can be a lot harder. So we're trying to temper or understand introducing cities to these things, and more importantly, getting them to use the calculator, because these are the things going forward. We can say in the next couple of years, we don't believe we're going to these cities. So these are mostly for the examples of cities to understand, combined with the page documents showing what's unique about Stockholm? What's unique about North Carolina? What's unique about Bangkok?
No,
Just to add to
please.
Kevin's point, essentially, like in terms of benchmarking, we have this championship happening in Bali this year. So if we were to benchmark that against Bangkok, they're closely related economies. So it would be a little bit of an assumption, but how the performance is in Bali, Indonesia, that would be a very direct indicator to Bangkok, for instance.
I just make last 2 points,
Yeah.
and I know to my colleagues. I would be cautious, okay, in saying that you are underestimating the result, the performance or the effect, okay, for many different reasons. I just give you one element, for instance, okay. You are just, for instance, assuming that even if the half of the budget has been financed by what you say external resources, okay, external sources of financing. You basically assume that all this money is spent in the territory, right? And often here we are not talking about very large territory geographically, right? So when the event is organized in a city, it's probably organized mainly in one convention center. How many convention centers are you? How many venues? I know it's not like a multi-sport event like the Olympics, where you may even have an entire, let me say, not a city, but right, surrounding of the city. Okay? So the area is definitely larger. So how much of it, you need to be precise, how much of that inflow then exit from the local territory, because you pay suppliers for goods and services that their domicile is outside, right? So you see that there are plenty of things that in some way go against the fact that your estimate, this is just one thing, but many other. For instance, I'll just give you one more. In the case of, you were estimating, for instance, Bangkok. The case of Bangkok, you just mentioned that you have one of the criteria you want to use to choose a city is because there are center of interest, such as, for instance, a sponsor that already have their domicile there. But if these sponsors are the one that then put money to finance part, the money anyway is the money that is in the local territory, right? And is spent in the local territory. Would this money be spent anyway in this territory, or would this money be spent elsewhere? So to justify whether this could be considered really as an external inflow on the specific territory, okay, under your investigation. So what I'm saying here, let me say, we can go in detail for many other, concerning many other assumptions. This is not the point. The point is, if you present something like this, if one of the aim of the client is also to understand how he can propose the event to different cities, I think that a prudential approach could even be more beneficial in also the negotiation phase with potential city representative, because then you need to be sure that the assumption in some way should be defended in that way. Like, this is the minimum. If you are able to say this is the minimum, then you are also, let me say, in some way better off than to explain that whatever you produce more is just, additional added value. That was, let me say, the point I wanted to make.
I think they're very good points. Thinking about the external suppliers in the location, we actually took the county or the metropolitan statistic area, so not the sole city itself, but as the city reflects on the overall area. So Stockholm is actually Stockholm County. Bangkok is the Bangkok metropolitan area. Raleigh, North Carolina is the Raleigh metropolitan area.
What is important to define the reference point very, very clearly, right?
Yes.
This is something that not necessarily is clearly stated. Okay, you need to say that exactly. This is the reference area. This is the reference period. This is the reference organization. This is the scope of each evaluation. In that sense.
Understood. Okay, thank you.
No,
Thank you.
sorry, I think basically.
We heard it from the expert. Maybe some other members of the jury would have questions.
Apologies.
Thank you for your presentation. Just a precision again, it's a little bit in the same question than Professor Berchi asked. The reference area being, for instance, in Eilat case, it's Eilat.
It's
Eilat and Grand and neighborhood,
It's the ALAT larger metropolitan area.
Then the funding from the, when you say from the government,
Correct.
talk about the government of Eilat or
Yes.
the government of Israel?
It's the government of ALAT specifically, not from the national governments.
Municipality.
Okay. So then you
Oh,
don't
yeah.
count this funding?
Yeah.
Correct. No,
exactly.
we're only correcting the municipal, or if there's a regional government that maps directly onto that, that would be considered the government funding, taken out in step number 3.
Thank you.
Any other questions?
I have one regarding your visitors, because you don't say much about the one who go to this event. And I suspect that they are not the same one that go to Olympic Games, spend good money. I suspect that you have young people traveling, not spending much, and this is again something important in your.
So something that came up in our discussions about who the visitors are and who they were in ILAT, for instance, it's usually young professionals. I would say in between, like, of course, the kids are watching it, definitely, but it's the young professionals who are making money who can travel across the world. They're the ones that are going for they're the ones that are traveling for these championships. Mostly, I would not assume that any 15-year-old has decided that he wants to go from, I don't know, Seattle to Eilat. So it is there is a spending capacity in this.
But these are not people like Claude with deep pockets. Each time he goes away somewhere and spends
Right.
20K.
So how we clear the spend? Yeah, of course. Claude would
Go
spend
shopping,
1,000.
eat by Omega,
Basically,
anywhere.
they put $320
Yeah.
Yes,
$320
USD, yeah.
per day per attendee.
Yeah, but $330 is already
It's
an
not
amount.
much, it's not enough.
So
It's
there
not
are
nothing.
there are 4 tiers that we've considered of. I'm not sure if we have in the presentation. No, I don't think so. So there are 4 tiers. One is the low spenders, whereas usually around in the range of about $100 USD for 3 or 4 days. If they move to Bangkok, I'm just taking the example of Bangkok for instance. Then we have like someone, a medium spender, then we have a high spender, and then we have a luxury spender that we've considered. I think it's there. Yeah, it is there. I don't think. No, I don't think. Yeah, there we go. Yeah, there we go. So you can see there's a normal style, there's economic, there's medium, and then there's luxury on those numbers. So these are all the spend across. So what we've done is we've taken an aggregate of all 4.
But you make assumption regarding the mix.
Right. Yes. Yes.
But just to say, for instance, when you ask, for instance, for an event, when you want to measure an event for 12 days, you cannot assume that 4,500 people stays for the whole 12 days.
Right.
It's too much.
Well, 12 days is actually just competition time. So
Right.
there are more events on the other side, and these are those.
Sure, but I mean, I tell you, for instance, when I do it, when I've done this multiple times for FISU, no way that you have 4,000, I mean, only the athletes and so on, okay, but how many are these people? So because then the number of attendees is not the average number, this is the total number of attendees that you are estimating, right? How many of these are athletes, technical officials?
No,
Those people stay typically.
These people
for-
are spectators. These don't include anyone paid. These are not.
These are only spectators.
Correct.
Yeah, but
Okay.
maybe assumption.
This goes even
Yeah.
against, even more against this. Spectators, they stay there for 12 days, they don't, okay, maybe they go there for holidays, right? But therefore, is really the only reason, is this the only reason for them to be there? Or maybe they just wanted to enjoy the Mediterranean Sea or whatever, right? So that's why I'm saying it needs to be careful, assumption by assumption. This is a tricky point, in that
Yes,
sense,
it's
but.
slightly complicated to predict this for the future.
Sure. We know it's complex.
Because I think Mr. Todowski, you have another question. So you raise your hand at some point.
Yeah, I raised the hand. I wanted to explain this about all the people staying there. It's like when people go to a handball competition that lasts for 2 weeks, or a football World Cup or something that lasts for 30 days and stay there and watch most of the games. It's similar in esports. And just one other note that now on this year's World Championship in Bali, which is 12 days, besides having almost 1,000 players there, we are going to have more than 200 delegates, VIPs, journalists, influencers, streamers, who will be there for the whole duration of the event. not to mention the technical staff, the people that are outsourcing for the event. So the whole event and everything around it will bring to Bali close to 5,000 people that will be there for the 12 days. So this is a huge influx of people, and of course, most of those people will spend money. And what we discovered, what actually they discovered, is that, of course, the amount longer is cheaper cost of living in the country. The cost of living is more expensive, and of course, the amount is much higher. And from our experience in AILA, which was shorter because of COVID, and it was really complicated to manage it, we had really VIPs spending much more money than the ones that are seen here. We had medium people, delegates, media, and everybody's spending a lot of money also just for food, drinks, experiences. A lot of people went to see all the tourist attractions when they had a day off, but they remained there for the duration of the whole event. So I think that more or less the assumptions made here are really close to the truth and what exactly is happening.
And another question, which has more to do with the business model of eSport. Don't you think it's a bit contradictory to have eSport but on-site player and on-site spectator? Everything should be E or nothing.
It's always E, if that's the question. Any event that is happening across the globe, it's always broadcasted.
Yeah, I know, but you still want to move people to make money.
It's not us asking.
I know.
It's people who want to come and watch these players do their thing. So it's more from the demand side, that people are demanding there be physical competition so they can watch these people do what they do best. So it's not that. I mean, there is of course an element of.
How many people watch from their home? I mean, not moving and watch. I mean, what is a?
I would say, like, in what kind of event, what scale of event are we talking about? Because there are like regional level, national level.
About 5,000 people, 4,000 people going. How many viewers?
You're looking at about 7 to 10 million, I would say. More or less in the range, 7 to 10 million watching online. But again, there's complexities with this as well. They're not watching it all the time. Some of them are watching it for 15 minutes. So all the broadcasting things come into play. How long are they watching? What is the rating of this stream, etc. So all those factors come into play. But yeah. Yes.
I understand, or I think to know that when you do economic analysis of events, there are multiple models you can apply. It seemed to me that you said right at the beginning that you chose one specific model, which was kind of almost imposed or suggested. Imposed or suggested to you.
It says that the study applies the method proposed by.
Yeah, exactly. So,
In-house model, like I said.
in-house. Okay. And maybe my question goes beyond the scope, because you had the in-house model, and that's probably was safe and good for you to go with. I mean, there was no choice.
IeSF started with a nickel impact. The very beginning of IeSF was the nickel impact.
Are there models? Are you aware of models where additional factors come into play which may be important for those kind of events, like the fact that nobody ever before heard about ELAT ever, but thanks to this event or to similar events, people may recognize, know about, maybe even imagine to go there.
There are models. It's very hard to measure. I know that measuring brand value after long-term events and its tail end over multiple years is very difficult. I think that's part of the reason we did this option, which looked at physical money in the area. That is one of the things we thought about in the beginning, and unfortunately, due to the scope of our team, the size of the time that we had, that would be something that we could recommend to IeSF to explore in the future, but just wasn't in the scope of the project for this one. And I do think you bring up a very valuable idea that we should consider into the future.
Which model you mentioned?
There was I can talk to you after this. There's
also a recent one where you modified this correct model for the Switzerland measurement of economic impact, right?
All years.
Yeah.
As long as Sidri doesn't move, I asked a very small other question, which just surprised me. It was, by the way, what I liked in your presentation was that you went far beyond what your title announces. So there are multiple extra surprises for dessert here in your presentation. Not only economic impact, but also host city selection.
Yeah.
In the host city selection, there was one element, one criterion. I think it was the presence of publishers. Why, according to you or other experts, is that important?
So,
You can,
okay. No, so this is essentially, if you consider a few of the North American publishers, this is based on trends, like where the publishers are, most number of events are happening around that area. So this was a criterion, like Blizzard is where?
Blizzard's always in Anaheim. At BlizzCon, they had three things. Esports is different than traditional sports, as publishers own the IP, right? And they get to control where they want their events and control how much exposure their events they want there. And part of the reason they like having their events near their headquarters is it not only drums up support for their own employees, but also creates the idea that this is a local economy and this is a network effect that more esport innovators should come to these kinds of cities.
From a publisher point of view, I understand that they want to have or they naturally start in their environment. But from a
Right, but
IF or
we need their IP. So we can't have the event without their IP and their say-so. And that's the difference between traditional events is you can have an event and play football, but we can't have a Dota event without the sign-off from Dota's publisher.
yes.
And that's why there's the additional complexity for esports compared to the traditional environment.
and they're more reluctant to sign up an event which is in Stockholm than
Yeah,
which
because
is in their city.
they don't want to control it as much, and then they have the ability to have people on the ground. Like I said, is having areas in their preferred area close to them gives them more proximity, allows their employees to see it, encourages certain cities to be developed or not, and it is one of those unique aspects of esports compared to traditional sports.
Okay, I know.
Good.
Good.
I think on that note, we will then close the Q&A discussion. Thank you very much. I invite you as well as any person in the audience to leave the room so that the